Hi, so I'm sure that everybody knows about Starlite. And if you don't, it was a material that made its appearance in Tomorrow's World back in the 1980s, and the inventor was such a guy for secrecy that he actually spoiled absolutely everything and took that secret to the grave with him, so it never made it to the market. But he did something that I'm sure he didn't intend to, and that was to show it was possible. After he gave his demonstrations and was a bit of a loony about the whole affair, I mean, it was weird things, like he would want to be picked up in a helicopter, but the helicopter had a sofa fitted. And he just made such demands on people they gave up on him. But he did show this amazing possibility, so much so that other people began to do research into it, knowing it was doable. That's a very different position to aim for than begin something not knowing you can't do it. And so there have been some amazing products brought out where you get paints that you can paint on something and give you fantastic fire protection. Now there are two main ways of approaching fire protection. One is called intumescent. Intumescence is where you heat a material and it will give off a gas and create a foam. And the top of that foam forms a carbon surface which is protective, but because it's a foam, that carbon surface is being pushed away from the surface you want to protect. So it burns away, forming a new carbon surface, and gives the actual surface a ton of protection. And carbon is brilliant at dissipating heat, and so the bit behind the foam, and the carbonised foam, doesn't get hot. And you can buy some great paints and materials these days that do exactly that. So although Starlite as an actual material has disappeared, Starlite as an intumescent paint that can give that kind of protection is actually on the market now under loads of different trade names, because the inventor, who stood to gain millions, wanted billions, but he showed something unintentional, that it could be done. But there is another way of approaching fire protection, and that's called ablative. Ablative protection was what was applied, sorry about that, to heat shield during the space race. The heat shield is designed to burn away. It burns away in layers, and as it burns away, it becomes a carbon that protects it, so the bit behind it doesn't burn until that bit's burnt away, and so on and so on and so on. And it is designed to burn away. And one way of noticing the difference in intumescent and ablative protection is ablative protection tends to bore a hole into the material. Intumescent tends to form bubbles on top of the material. Now, Starlite is lost, but the idea in Starlite style coatings, which perform as well, is about. But there is something that's really quite surprising. One of the great fire protection materials, believe it or not, is this stuff. Now, we'll find that difficult to believe because you use paper to start your fire. You wrinkle it up a little bit, set it alight, stick it on your fire, and it's a great way to start a fire. So who would think that that was actually a really good fire prevention material? Not like that, but like this it is. If you take one of these things and try to burn it, you'll find actually it's quite difficult to burn. Now, incidentally, I'm using this story not as a commentary on the literary merits of a Disney tale, but because it was on sale in Asda and I could buy 4 of them for £1. So, no worries. But once it's bound up like this, then it acts like an ablative material. Let me show you that. It bored a hole into the paper over 5 minutes with a butane torch, remaining cool to the touch. Actually didn't change at all. I had a thermometer on it, electrical thermometer reading the other side. No change in temperature. Boring a hole, it bored down about 80 sheets of paper in that 5 minutes of time, which is pretty impressive to think that it's just a piece of paper. However, we can take that Starlite idea, and combining it with the already fire-resistant properties of paper, we can make a much better material. So if we take that paper and paint it with something that's going to create a carbon foam, and sugar's brilliant for that, And if we want to get a bit of gas in there, we put some bicarbonate of soda in there, it'll form carbon dioxide under heat, and we'll get a carbon foam as well as an ablative material. So it's a combined material. So I've got in this cup is 20 grams of sugar, 20 grams of sodium bicarbonate and 40 millilitres of water to make a paint. And what we're going to do is paint the pages of the book. Okay, there's the book painted. Let's stick it in the rig, turn some fire on it and see what happens. Here are my two books. This is the one that was untreated, and you can see it's got a circular hole in there where the flame burnt down, burning away the layers of paper. And as these layers of paper formed carbon, they became a heat shield. They stayed as a heat shield until they flaked away, in which case the next layer of paper burnt to become a carbon, and then a heat shield, and so on, which is exactly how ablative protection works. And so paper in layers works quite well as an ablative material. Here is the one where we coated it in sugar, and you can see it's very different. It hasn't bored down very much at all. We've got this white ash here, hardly any boring down, but it has puckered it up quite a lot because it's formed a foam and pushed the paper out. And as it's pushed it out, it's created a heat shield of carbon that has burnt away eventually to the next layer, but has formed that intumescent style of protection. So what was interesting about that was that the paper is fireproofing in itself. 5 minutes under 800 degrees centigrade, 80 pages burnt away, and no transfer of heat to the back. Of itself, extremely impressive and counterintuitive, because you'd expect paper to burn. We can improve it by bringing a Starlite element in there, that is, painting it with sugar and sodium bicarbonate. Perhaps we could add some borax. If we do that, we get an additional fire protection, reducing the amount of paper needed to only 20 sheets to give you that kind of protection. So, impressive stuff all by itself. Now, comparing paper and Starlite is obviously very difficult. For a start, there is no Starlite you can actually use. There's only the Starlite copies. Starlite uses intumescence and paper uses ablative ideas, and that direct comparison is very difficult to make because of that. Now, the modern interpretations of Starlite are super impressive. It's amazing to see what they've actually done with it, and I think Starlite itself has really had its day. I mean, it was an amazing material back in the 80s, but now there are just better materials out there. And the mistake Morris made was really to keep it too secret, and if he was going to let people know it could be done, then he was doomed to somebody sooner or later overtaking what he was doing. But paper is where I'm really interested, because paint is great for applying to strange surfaces, railings, that kind of thing. Paper in large panels, obviously, is much cheaper and easier to form. So you could form fire retardant, fire resistant panels, and here we're thinking about building panels, that would have amazing ability to resist fire if you took an ordinary piece of paper and painted it with sugar and borax, or sugar and bicarbonate, and you'll get a huge amount of fire protection from that, which we perhaps wouldn't originally have thought about. It might be an interesting idea to look into, because economically, papering something is going to be a lot cheaper than preparing and painting something. Anyway, I thought I would do that, more of a comparison rather than a versus, but certainly a versus, that paper and Starlite, very different materials, but could be used in very different applications. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, and please do remember to like and subscribe.